Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, October 21st, 2020. Just a program note, tomorrow, Thursday, is the second presidential debate, and so my show will begin at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 5 p.m. Eastern time, so as not to conflict with that debate. So, Catholic Church goes gay. Here is a piece from the official or semi-official Catholic news agency. In a documentary that premiered Wednesday in Rome, Pope Francis called for the passage of civil union laws for same-sex couples, departing from the position of the Vatican's doctrinal office and the Pope's predecessors on the issue. The remarks came amid a portion of the documentary that reflected on pastoral care for those who identify as alphabet people. Quote, homosexuals have a right to be part of the family. They're children of God and have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or be made miserable because of it, unquote. After those remarks, and in comments likely to spark controversy among Catholics, Pope Francis weighed in directly on the issue of civil unions for same-sex couples. Quote, what we have to create is civil union law. That way they are legally covered. I stood up for that, unquote. The remarks come in Francesco, a documentary on the life and ministry of Pope Francis, which premiered today as part of the Rome Film Festival and is set to make its North American premiere on Sunday. The film chronicles the approach of Pope Francis to pressing social issues and to pastoral ministry amongst those who live, in the words of the pontiff, on the existential peripheries. This term, children of God, it's not one that children of God or people of God, it's not one that we heard very much before the 1960s. It's a rubbish phrase, which means, I think it means the good people. It means the good people like Pope Francis, as he sees himself. It largely replaced an earlier term, now thought to be embarrassing, the church militant. Back to CNA, featuring interviews with Vatican figures, including Cardinal Luigi Taglia and other collaborators with the Pope. Francesco looks at the Pope's advocacy for migrants and refugees, the poor, his work on the issue of clerical sexual abuse, what you mean covering it up, the role of women in society, and the disposition of Catholics and others toward those who identify as alphabet people. The film addresses the pastoral outreach of Pope Francis to those who identify as alphabet people, including a story of the pontiff encouraging two Italian men in a same-sex relationship to raise their children in their parish church, which one of the men said was greatly beneficial to his children. The Pope's remarks on civil unions come amid part of that documentary. The Pope's direct call for civil union laws represents a shift from the perspective of his predecessors, and from his own more circumspect positions on civil unions in the past. In 2010, while he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Pope Francis opposed efforts to legalize same-sex marriage, while Sergio Rubin, the future Pope's biographer, suggested that Francis supported the idea of civil unions as a way to prevent the wholesale adoption of same-sex marriage in Argentina. Miguel Huetes, a director of the Argentinian Catholic News Agency, AICA, dismissed in 2013 that claim as false. But the Pope's mention of having previously stood up for civil unions seems to confirm the reports of Rubin and others who said that then Cardinal Bergoglio supported privately the idea of civil unions as a compromise in Argentina. In the 2013 book On Heaven and Earth, Pope Francis did not reject the possibility of civil unions outright, but did say the laws assimilating homosexual relationships to marriage are an anthropological regression. And he expressed concern that if same-sex couples are given adoption rights, there could be affected children. Every person needs a male father and a female mother that can help them shape their identity. Yes, so what we have here is another example of what I call Grace's law of the paradoxical response. I gave some other examples in the past. One, what happened after 9/11, where one might have thought that Muslims in the West would be in serious trouble, but instead the very opposite happened. And I gave the perhaps more apposite example of the reaction to AIDS. You remember, if you're old enough, that in the mid-1980s, we were told essentially that this was everyone's disease, and there was a possibility that we were all going to die as a result. And I thought at the time that it seemed to be fairly obvious that homosexuals would be in serious trouble socially. But no, instead, the exact opposite happened. And what we have seen is, again, the exact opposite. That is to say, the complete triumph of the gay rights or homosexual rights agenda in the West. Not even a question of rights anymore. These people are our betters, our superiors, and we must not just tolerate them, but almost worship them. In my own benighted country of Canada, it is now de rigueur for all politicians to march in so-called pride parades, and those who don't are harried and asked repeatedly why they are not doing so, with the effect that, let's say, Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, perhaps he was considered for many years Canada's leading social conservative, found himself in the embarrassing situation last year where his United Conservative Party literally begged to be allowed to take part in a gay pride parade and was informed, no, I'm sorry, you have not shown your allyship in the past, and you're going to have to do more in order for us to let you march in the pride parade. In other words, more groveling is required. Of course, Jason Kenney, once Canada's leading social conservative, has boasted for many years of making the importation to Canada of gay Iranian refugees a priority. So let's see. Is anyone really surprised by this? I mean, I'm not. It's just been a succession of horrors ever since Francis became Pope. Pope Nasty, they call him. One of the first examples of this was when he was told that a bunch of pious women were praying novenas for his papacy, and he made it known publicly that he thought this was all nonsense. There was another example where he was passing by a group of altar boys, and they had their hands like this, in the prayerful position. No, stop doing that. Stop doing that. He doesn't like any of that. He doesn't like the Catholic Church. It's that simple. So let's see what the Telegraph has to say. Nick Squires, his endorsement of gay unions, which will be sharply divisive within the church. Yes, we know that already. The comments were welcomed by Catholic liberals, but greeted with anger and dismay by conservatives. They are already deeply opposed to the Pope's progressive views on issues like giving communion to remarried divorcees, his support for migrants, and his criticism of capitalism. The remarks come 7 years after Francis famously asked, "Who am I to judge?" about homosexuals, both in the church and in society at large. Yeah, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge? Let's see, what's happened in the Catholic Church since the 1960s, since the Second Vatican Council? Anything significant regarding homosexuals? Well, actually, there is. And what happened was a sodomitical cabal largely took control of the church, which caused incalculable damage to tens of thousands of people, particularly adolescent boys who were abused, often for years, by priests, bishops, cardinals. And this also caused incalculable damage to the church, not in the many billions, not just in the many billions of dollars, which have been paid out in settlements, but this poisoned the church's public reputation. It will continue to poison it for decades, if not centuries. And yet, instead of rooting out this sodomitical cabal and cleansing its Augean stables, the church now grovels to it. Keep in mind that John Paul II, who was made a saint, he knew about this. He knew about this almost from the beginning of his papacy. And what did he decide to do? Well, the prelate who had brought this to him, the apostolic nuncio, was sacked as a result. And Jason Berry once told me, Jason Berry is a liberal associated with the National Catholic Reporter, but his reporting on the clerical sexual scandals has been top-notch. I interviewed him once, and he said that when he was in Louisiana, which is where this first raised its ugly head in North America, a tearful mother, the mother of a child who had been abused by a Catholic church, came up to him and begged him, the Pope must know about this. The Pope must know about this. And Jason Berry told me I didn't have the heart to tell her that the Pope already knew about it. Later, in his papacy, John Paul II, who we're supposed to regard as a saint now, issued a formal statement. And he sounded very much like the Minister of the Interior in A Clockwork Orange after the Lodovico technique has gone all J.G. Ballard. He said, this is what the Pope said, that we had taken expert advice, but this expert advice had turned out to be wrong. And the expert advice was to treat this as a psychological problem and not as a moral problem. It was of no interest to John Paul II. Now, there are many requirements of sainthood, but one of them, it's not entirely sufficient simply to have led a holy life or to be a martyr, but that one's life must rate what they call a universal cultus. And obviously a pope who ignored, who swept under the rug, who took one of the leading figures in the American church, the Archbishop of Boston, and gave him a cushy job in the Vatican, is not worthy of being pope. Not worthy of being saint, because there's no possibility of a universal cultus. But back to the Telegraph. While the Pope's endorsement of same-sex unions will make little practical difference in countries where they are already permitted, it will have huge ramifications for Catholic countries in the developing world. Thomas Rees, a Jesuit and author of Inside the Vatican, said, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, he is way ahead of the curve in talking about civil unions. In some countries in Africa, it is still a crime to engage in homosexual activities. In Latin America, there are people who will say gays do not exist. So to talk about civil unions is revolutionary. There are Muslim imams and very conservative evangelical groups who are competing for congregations. They will be able to play this card against the Catholic Church. Now, I don't know whether Father Rees knows this or not, or whether it's something that he knows but wouldn't want to say publicly. The Pope is not interested in competing for congregations. He is not interested in spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ to enlightening the heathen. He's not interested in that at all. He has made it very clear that he believes in the process of the late lamentable Jesuit Karl Rochner, who spoke of the church of the little flock. And in other words, to borrow a joke from Spinal Tap, he is determined to make the church's appeal more selective. And more on that later. And of course, the church's appeal has become more selective since the 1960s because the number of people who go to Mass weekly has collapsed. Oh, I don't know. It has been reduced by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. The number of priests and both secular and in the orders, nuns have absolutely collapsed. The number of Catholics who actually believe in the real presence, say, absolutely collapsed. The number of Catholics who even could explain what the real presence means has absolutely collapsed. In the US, Father Rees said, I'm sure there will be people on the conservative right who will say this is terrible, as they do with much of what Francis does. Father James Martin, or Father Jim, as he likes to be called, a Jesuit priest who has spearheaded efforts to build bridges with gays in the church, said the remarks were, quote, a major step forward in the church's support for alphabet people, unquote. His remarks will incense many conservative Catholics, some of whom wish Benedict XVI had never resigned from the papacy in 2013. This will be the last straw for a number of Catholics who have become increasingly incensed at the Pope's words, which can be read in a variety of ways, often contrary to the faith. Well, that's one way to put it, said Edward Penton, who is the author of The Next Pope, about which cardinal is likely to be elected Francis' successor. These Catholics, who tend to be churchgoers, which is significant, and take their faith seriously, again significant, are outraged by these comments and incredulous that a pope would say this, as they say it directly undermines church teaching. Francis' support for gay unions would probably serve to embolden a growing number of Catholics who believe Benedict XVI is still pope and that Francis is an impostor or even an anti-pope, as well, that's certainly my position. A Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales spokesman said, quote, we'd argue there shouldn't be discrimination on the basis of sexuality, and civil unions offer a legislative equivalent. However, we understand marriage to be a direct union between a man and a woman. Yes, and again, the thin end of the wedge. This is what we're looking at. Maybe in a decade's time, Pope John Paul Francis II or the third. Well, yes, of course, gay marriage, absolutely. And any priests who don't believe in it will be expelled, excommunicated. I mean, that's what's coming if current trends continue. Of course, if current trends continue, one wonder how much of the Catholic Church will actually be left in 10 or 20 years. The story in the New York Post from Natalie O'Neill is Pope Francis infallible? Internet demands to know after same-sex civil union support. Yes, the term infallible, which means incapable of preaching flawed doctrines, has for centuries held true for the Pope, according to Catholic.com, which quoted scripture. Quote, infallibility belongs in a special way to the Pope as head of the bishops. As Vatican II remarked, it is a charism the Pope enjoys in virtue of his office when, as the supreme shepherd and teacher of all the faithful, who commits his brethren in their faith, he proclaims by a definitive act some doctrine of faith, of morals. That is not quite true. Catholic.com goes on to say, therefore, his definitions of themselves and not from the consent of the Church are justly held irreformable, for they are pronounced with the assistance of the Holy Spirit and assistance provided to him in Blessed Peter. The doctrine of infallibility was very controversial when it was promulgated at the First Vatican Council in, if memory serves, 1870 or 1871. Now, the people who were in favor of the doctrine of papal infallibility were called ultramontanists. Now, even they did not believe that the Pope was in se infallible. The Pope is infallible only when he speaks ex cathedra, which means from the throne. And he proclaims a doctrine which is already held to be Catholic belief. This scandalous heretical notion has grown up under Pope Francis and the since disgraced Father Rosica spoke often of this, a personal magisterium. Now, the magisterium is the collectivity of Catholic belief and practice. The Pope does not have a personal magisterium. He is not the dictator. He is not the Stalin. He is not the Hitler of the Church. If that were the case, then the next Pope, whoever he might be, could say whatever he wanted. He could reverse anything that previous pope had said, anything all manner of popes had said. So no, the pope is not infallible. And of course, I'm reminded of a very famous scene in Evelyn Waugh's novel Brideshead Revisited, which is included in the television version, where a rich Canadian, Rex Mottram, wants to marry Lady Julia Flight. And she is a Catholic and he is not. And so it is a religious family, so he is compelled to take instruction. So he is sent off to an old priest on Farm Street. It was where the Jesuits are headquartered in London. And this old venerable priest explained that he was the most difficult catechumen that he had ever seen, because he seemed to take it all in, but he didn't seem to understand it. And one day he asked Rex Mottram, what if the Pope had said that it were raining and it was not raining? And Mottram said, well, I suppose you could say that it was spiritually raining, but that we were too sinful to see it. That's been a long-standing Catholic joke, and the nightmare is that joke has become a reality under Pope Francis. So what has the church said in the past about this? Steve Skojek of 1 Peter 5 had a piece today about this. In a 2003 instruction from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith on the question of homosexual civil unions, signed by then Cardinal Ratzinger as prefect and approved of by Pope John Paul II, a view incompatible with that now espoused by Pope Francis is presented. Quote, there are absolutely no grounds for considering homosexual unions to be in any way similar or even remotely analogous to God's plan for marriage and family. Marriage is holy, while homosexual acts go against the natural moral law. Homosexual acts close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine affective and sexual complementarity. Under no circumstances can they be approved. Sacred Scripture condemns homosexual acts as a serious depravity, and Romans, Corinthians, and Timothy are quoted. This judgment of Scripture does not, of course, permit us to conclude that all those who suffer from this anomaly are personally responsible for it, but it does attest to the fact that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered, unquote. Intrinsically disordered. You see this psychological talk replacing moral judgments. Before the Second Vatican Council, the church held a rather stronger moral view on this. Well into the 1970s in both Britain, America, and Canada, with the Baltimore Catechism and the Penny Catechism, as they called it in Britain, you would find out what are the 4 sins that cry to heaven for vengeance. And the 4 sins that cry to heaven for vengeance, and this is the considered judgment of the Catholic Church, are 1, willful murder; 2, the sin of Sodom; 3, oppression of the poor; and 4, depriving workers of their wages. Those are the 4 worst sins that cry for heaven to vengeance. But no, we can't have that old-fashioned morality talk, because it seems rather harsh, you know. It seems rather harsh, but what are we talking about here? We are supposed to be talking about one's immortal soul. The whole point of the church is souls to heaven. That's its point. Everything else is secondary. But now, again, let's talk about migrants. And let's talk about the duty of Western European countries and the United States in particular to have open borders. That's far more important than, souls to heaven. Souls to heaven, that was part of the old church. And Vatican II destroyed that old church. Now, for decades, what we were told officially and what we were told by the so-called conservatives of the Catholic Church, as opposed to the traditionalists, is no. Everything in Vatican II is perfectly consonant with the traditional views of the Church. And then we find that, well, it isn't. We find that it isn't. And Vatican II is trotted out again and again to justify all manner of horrors. The great Monsignor Lefebvre, the founder of the Society of Pope Pius X, he of holy memory, he spoke prophetically of the time bombs in the church. And these bombs have been going off for what, more than 50 years now. Oh, no. Vatican II doesn't require that the old mass be wrecked and replaced with a pale substitute. No. That'd be a ridiculous thing to say. But now, of course, we are told that is exactly what it requires. Looking up, yes. Again, to quote Yves Lenoir from his short novel Love Among the Ruins, that the message that the Catholic Church said to the alphabet people till a few decades ago, my lad, you are embarking upon a course of life that can only lead to disaster and degradation in this world and everlasting damnation in the next. Pretty harsh talk, true enough, but Jesus Christ himself engaged in some pretty harsh talk. But now we're supposed to believe that he was, I don't know, he was down. He was down with the homosexuals, with the alphabet people. He was sort of a Palestinian Che Guevara. It was really more about politics than anything else. The saintly Archbishop Carl Maria Vigano has spoken about this, and again, it's on the 1 Peter 5 site. The Vatican News website has reported the news today that at Rome Film Festival, a documentary film will be screened called Francesco. This documentary, according to what has been reported by the Catholic News Agency, makes several public pronouncements of Jorge Murillo Bergoglio on the topic of homosexuality. Among the various statements, these two are particularly disconcerting. Homosexuals have a right to be part of the family. They're children of God and have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or be made miserable because of it. What we have to create is civil union law. That way they are legally covered. I stood up for that, unquote. One does not have to be a theologian or moral expert to know that such statements are totally heterodox and constitute a very serious cause of scandal for the faithful. But pay careful attention. These words simply constitute the umpteenth provocation by which the ultra-progressive part of the hierarchy wants to artfully provoke a schism, as it has already tried to do with the post-synodal exhortation Amoris Laetitia, the modification of doctrine on the death penalty, the Pan-Amazon Synod, and the filthy Pachamama and the Abu Dhabi Declaration, which has now been reaffirmed and aggravated by the encyclical Fratelli Tutti. It appears that Bergoglio is impudently trying to raise the stakes in a crescendo of heretical affirmations in such a way that will force the healthy part of the church, which includes bishops, clergy, and faithful, to accuse him of heresy in order to declare that healthy part of the church schismatic and the enemy of the Pope. Jorge Maria Bergoglio is trying to force some cardinals and bishops to separate themselves from communion with him, obtaining as a result not his own deposition for heresy, but rather the expulsion of Catholics who want to remain faithful to the perennial magisterium of the Church. This trap would have the purpose, in the presumed intentions of Bergoglio and his magic circle, of consolidating his own power within a church that would only nominally be Catholic, but in reality would be heretical and schismatic. This deception draws on the support of the globalist elite, the mainstream media, and the alphabet people lobby, to which many clergy, bishops, and cardinals are no strangers. Furthermore, let us not forget that in many nations there are laws in force which criminally punish anyone who considers sodomy reprehensible and sinful, or who does not approve of the legitimization of homosexual matrimony, even if they do so on the basis of their creed. A pronouncement by the bishops against Bergoglio on a question like homosexuality could potentially lead civil authority to prosecute them criminally with the approval of the Vatican. Bergoglio would thus have on his side not only the deep church, represented by rebels like Father James Martin, Society of Jesus, and those who promote the German synodal path, but also the deep state. It is not surprising that in the documentary there is also an endorsement of the Democratic candidate in the upcoming American presidential election, along with a disconcerting condemnation of the policy of the Trump administration, which is accused of separating families that want to enter the United States illegally, while the reality is that the president is confronting human trafficking and the trafficking of minors. Thus, while conservative American bishops are forbidden from intervening in the political debate in support of President Trump, the Vatican allows itself to casually interfere in the elections in favor of his Democratic adversary, in union with the censorship by social and news media of the very serious accusations against the Biden family. As Catholics, we are called to side with those who defend life, the natural family, and national sovereignty. We thought that we had the Vicar of Christ at our side. We painfully acknowledge that in this epochal clash, he who ought to be guiding the bark of Peter has chosen to side with the enemy in order to sink it. Recalling the courage of the holy pontiffs in defending the integrity of the faith and promoting the salvation of souls, one can only observe quantum mutatis ab illis, how changed from what they once were, which is a quotation from Virgil's Aeneid. Let's go to the chat, see what's happening there. Oh, before we go into the chat, it is said that at the time of Pope John Paul II's election in 1978, that he was going to foment a counter-revolution. Keep in mind, this was only 13 years after the end of the Second Vatican Council and 8 years after the imposition of the so-called Novus Ordo, or New Mass. And the story goes is that he had a conversation with the Primate of Poland, and he confessed to the Primate of Poland that he was not willing to do that because it would promote a schism in the church. Well, there have been schisms in the church before. How long, Lord? How long? I suppose there's practical problems involved with this. To name one, the churches, basilicas, cathedrals, etc., are the properties of the bishops. And if there is a schism, these will be lost. I would rather attend Mass in a shack than attend a Mass of a sodomitical church. But again, let's go to the chat here. Yo Mama says, thank God I'm Orthodox. Yes, the ecumenical patriarch can and say lots of dumb stuff, and most of us aren't beholden to even defend it. Well, the Pope can say lots of dumb stuff, though in the past they did not. One is obliged to follow the Pope only in matters of faith and morals, and of course only when they're speaking authoritatively. Dark Wolverine says, God, it's horrifying to see Catholic Church have this inflicted on it. But I just want you all to remember that this has been going on since 1962, the beginning of the Second Vatican Council, and arguably since 1958, when Pope John the 23rd succeeded Pius the 12th. Jay Smith says, I'll tell you what happened. The Catholics forgot all about its history of expulsions. William Hicks says, stumbled onto the news, the rainbow flag, and quotes from the Pope. So I guess gay and lesbian couplings, triplings, quads are a high priority for the Catholic Church now. Brandon Smith, compared to previous pedo priest scandals, this should have been obvious. Dying institutions get desperate to survive. Well, no, if the Catholic Church had been desperate to survive, it would have, as soon as it had known about these scandals, issued the appropriate apologies as, rubbing one's forehead on the floor would be appropriate. All of the bishops, archbishops, cardinals who were involved in taking part in covering this up would have been sacked. And the traditional Catholic view of homosexuality would have been made explicit once again. And perhaps most important, the Herculean effort to cleanse the Augean stables of the places where Catholics are taught to be priests, the seminaries, which from the late 1960s have been hotbeds of homosexuality, where the seminarians are typically called by women's names, just as they are in Anglican seminaries. How very amusing. Just the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, I mentioned that he had been whisked away to a prime job in the Vatican in the midst of, the biggest scandal in Boston Catholic history, one of the biggest scandals in the Catholic Church itself. His archdiocese had argued in court that the mother of a 6-year-old boy who had been molested by a Catholic priest was partially to blame for this because she had been foolish enough to allow this 6-year-old boy to be in the company of this priest. Yes, that actually happened. That was cardinal law of Boston. This is what his archdiocese argued legally, formally. I'll just mention that the specific priest involved, was one of the founders of NAMBLA. Yes, the Catholic Church, particularly in Boston, has a very significant role in the founding of NAMBLA, which is the North American Man-Boy Love Association. You don't think that this wasn't well known in Boston and elsewhere? Canada Corner, yes. Let's see. What else do we have on this? Ricardo Williams says, doesn't he speak for God from the Catholic point of view? No, this is terribly circumscribed, and this is what most Catholics don't understand, and a lot of Catholics don't understand. The Pope cannot say that it's raining when it's not raining and make us assent to the proposition that it's raining. The Pope cannot say, as this Pope has said, that Jesus was not perfect. Can you imagine that? He's actually said that. I could read down the list of all of the ghastly things that this Pope has said, but of course it doesn't start with him. When John Paul II, the supposed saint, was Pope, the Vatican put out that the Jews do not need conversion, which is gross, damnable heresy. And we know from the words of Jesus Christ himself that all are to be converted to the faith, and that Peter was enjoined with sending people throughout the world to convert them. But of course, since the 1960s, conversion is considered deeply embarrassing by the Catholic Church. Now, Benedict XVI, the former Cardinal Ratzinger, he was a friend of a prominent American rabbi and Talmudic scholar. I'm trying to remember his name. Newhouse. No. They're a very different man. He had a German name too. But he'd written over, 400 books on the Talmud. Now, they were friends, and a book of correspondence published. There was no pretense on either of these parties that there were not profound differences between the Catholic faith and the Jewish faith. No, but I'll tell you a story about the present Pope, Bergoglio, that when he was Neusner, Jacob Neusner, yes, he wrote a book with the Pope, a book of letters. I had the good fortune to interview Rabbi Neusner once. He was a very sensible man. But when Bergoglio was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he once invited Jewish rabbis to his palace, and he ordered that all signs of Christian belief, crosses, crucifixes, and the like, were to be removed or covered up. And he also removed or covered up his own pectoral cross. This is not what a believer would do. And it's not, I'm sure that the rabbis must have been taken aback by this. Similarly, if the rabbis, the leading rabbis in Buenos Aires had invited Bergoglio to dine with them, it would have been unthinkable for them to hide symbols of Jewish observance. When I heard this story, I just came to the conclusion that this man is not a Catholic. He is not even a Christian. Okay, political Christianity is always fraught with pitfalls, says Ricardo Williams, and that's typically why the Catholic Church stayed away from it. Now, the present Pope seems to have an opinion on everything. When will the Pope get over it and just throw a virgin into a volcano, says Justin Proto. Well, I've been joking for years, it's a rather dark joke, that Bergoglio should be shoved into a sack and thrown into a Tiber, which is the traditional rest of Roman criminals. Again, from Ricardo Williams, this was always going to happen once society started accepting gays. All the gay priests were going to start demanding their share of the action. Well, they can demand it all they want, but that doesn't mean that they have to get it. Jules Roy says, at this rate, it will take a black African pope to save Catholicism from gayness, perhaps. But the fellow that everyone speaks about from Africa has been as loyal as possible publicly to Bergoglio. Ricardo Williams, gay mass is the only mass allowed now. There are gay masses that go on all over the Catholic world. This is not supposed to be allowed, but they've been going on, since the 1970s? Again, you can't be Catholic and question the Pope. That is not true. It's not true. There have been anti-popes in the past. There have been popes who have been rebuked, going back to the first Pope, Peter, who was rebuked by St. Paul on the question of whether Christians had to follow Jewish observance. Okay, let's get back to it here. Oh, yes. The Pope had some statements in an audience today which are just as revolting as his statements about gay marriage. Okay, let's see. He says, prayer is the salvation of the human being. There certainly also exists a false prayer, a prayer said only for the admiration of others. The person or those persons who go to Mass only to make it seem that they are Catholics or to show off the latest fashion that they have acquired or to make a good impression in society, they are moving toward false prayer. Well, one would think that the Catholic Church would be grateful for anyone who shows up to Mass, because not very many do these days. And I don't know what he's talking about, because to show up to Mass, to show off the latest fashion, who dresses up for Mass anymore? A few years ago, I attended Easter service in Victoria, and I was wearing a sport jacket and a tie and a pair of slacks, and I was the best dressed person in the church. The men and women were all dressed like slobs, and typically, yoga pants, midriff showing, all this kind of thing. And I don't know, that's not considered important anymore. Oh, and again, what he's talking about here is really a Protestant notion, which is he is integrated into the church. Of course, he's not the first. This idea of being a committed Christian, this idea that there's a kind of elect, within Catholicism. No, there is no such elect. He said in his audience, God does not support the atheism of those who repudiate the divine image that is imprinted in every human being. That everyday atheism, I believe in God, but I keep my distance from others and I allow myself to hate others. That is practical atheism. Not to recognize the human person as the image of God is a sacrilege, an abomination, the worst offense that can be directed toward the temple and the altar. You see, in other words, if you do not hold Bergoglio's political views, for instance, his deeply heretical view that a capital punishment is a sin, then you are a practical atheist. He is determined to force all Orthodox Catholics out of the church. That's his goal. And it's been his goal from the beginning. There's a Twitter feed called The Great Stalin, described as Englishman for SSPX, Against Modernism, Communism, Islamic Immigration, Trannies, and that ilk. He said some interesting comments. I read Vigano's piece on the Bergoglio's latest scandal. He says this is a power play. It does make sense to me. A man like Bergoglio, who clearly doesn't believe in the Catholic faith, probably doesn't believe in anything at all except his own mania for power. Yes, it's all about him. It's always about him and him only. Someone named SDK had tweeted, why do otherwise intelligent people speak as if this is the end, the final straw? No, Francis has received gay couples, counseled them, and encouraged them. This sounds like false outrage, and we see it over and over again from Catholic writers. Counsel, this is false counsel. The true counsel is to stop sinning and pray to God for strength. That is the real, true counsel. Again, from the Great Stalin, I've argued for several years that Bergoglio is the false prophet of St. John's apocalypse. He may be, he may not be, but if he's not, God help us when the real one comes along. I've spoken about the third secret of Fatima before and how it was supposed to be revealed roughly around 1960, but it kept not being revealed. And Benedict XVI, when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger, he delivered a version of the third secret, which was absolutely preposterous. And I was persuaded at the time, and I'm not alone in this, there's many people who agree with me, that the reason that the third secret of Fatima was never revealed is because it describes what has happened in the church. It describes an anti-pope coming to power in the Vatican and destroying the visible church. And that's why it was never revealed. So let's move on. Let's move on to Keith Olbermann. I think that he is proof that jock sniffing, which is how sports reporting has long been described, it leads to a neurological condition not dissimilar to that which is called general paresis or tertiary syphilis. This is from Dylan Gwynn at Breitbart. Former sports broadcaster Keith Olbermann left ESPN so he could say all the things he didn't feel he could say at ESPN, and he is certainly saying all of those things. On Tuesday, during an unhinged rant about President Trump and his response to the coronavirus, Olbermann said that the president should be given the, quote, death penalty, unquote, for each count of the 220,000 Americans who have died from the virus. In addition to calling for Trump to receive 220,000 death penalties, Olbermann also called the president a mentally incompetent, inhuman, dumb bastard. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Olbermann said that Trump supporters were, quote, maggots who should all be, quote, prosecuted. Trump can be and must be expunged, Olbermann said. The hate he has triggered, the Pandora's box he has opened, they will not be so easily destroyed. Who's being hateful now? Who's being hateful now, eh? I don't know. What is it that makes sports reporters so fatuous? Is it because they're been sucking up to dumb people for decades? Now, not everyone involved in professional sports is dumb, to be sure. But they pretend that they speak to stupid people who say stupid things, and they dress it up so it doesn't look stupid, or they're constantly defending people who do bad things, very bad things. They're supposed to be some sort of moral exemplars. Well, hardly. In the NFL and the NBA are dominated by people who are accepted into universities, often prestigious universities, when they do not have the marks. They do not have the marks to even graduate high school, but they are accepted to these universities because America's universities have decided to humiliate themselves. Well, for money, mostly, is what it comes down to. And one of the great American Catholic universities, Notre Dame, is no different in this respect. And I guess Boston College is no different in this respect at all. How exactly is Trump responsible for any death of coronavirus? Again, I'll trot out my metaphor that there's a drawer in his desk at the Oval Office, and he can open this drawer. Perhaps he needs a special key to unlock it. But inside there's this drawer. In this drawer, there's a magic wand, and he waves his magic wand, and then no Americans will get sick. You know that the death rate of even the juiced stats of the number of deaths in the United States, the death rates in many, many countries has now surpassed America per capita. And we're going to see more and more and more because America has been relatively sane compared to many other countries with regard to the efficacy of lockdowns. That unless you're going to lock people away forever, lockdowns don't work. So Halloween is coming up in 10 days, and it looks like we're really not supposed to do this in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is urging Canadians to stick to local health guidelines when considering how to celebrate Halloween next week. The question of how to handle the spooky evening is top of mind for many parents who are trying to assess the patchwork of regional health advice, guidance, and stern warnings about trick or treating. As someone said on Twitter yesterday, Canadian governments are literally now snatching candy from the hands of children. Quebec Premier François Legault has said trick-or-treating can go ahead in Canada's viral epicenter so long as participants wear face masks and head out with families rather than friends. Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Alberta's chief medical officer, said a surge in COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations. There's been no surge in hospitalizations. Has not changed her view that trick-or-treating is low risk. Trudeau said, "We know that it's not easy and it's frustrating. Unfortunately, all of us are having to make sacrifices of different types, particularly kids." What sacrifices has Justin Trudeau made? He grew a beard. Is that a sacrifice? He's pretty much blown off Parliament. That's not really a sacrifice for Justin Trudeau, is it? But, everyone should be media smart, said Dr. Theresa Tam, Canada's chief public health officer. Yes, let the panic mongers in the media tell you that you have to stop doing everything that you have done before. And is Christmas going to be canceled in Canada? I think in some places it will be. Is Christmas going to be canceled in the state of New York and New York City? I think that is a high likelihood. Joe Biden loves masks, and he had earlier talked about a national mask mandate, said it wasn't feasible. Well, what was he saying? We heard this at a Trump rally yesterday that, no, he's not against fracking. He and Kamala Harris are not against fracking. And he played several clips of them saying that not only that fracking had to be eliminated, but that fossil fuels entirely had to be eliminated. From Hannah Blow at Breitbart, Democrat presidential candidate Joe Biden is back to calling for a nationwide mask mandate, despite previously admitting that the Constitution would prevent him from enforcing it. Well, the Constitution, and let's say its protection of civil liberties, this didn't matter to Chief Justice John Roberts, the devout Catholic, who provided the difference in a Supreme Court decision regarding the governor of California's, let's say, Herod-like desire to end Christian services in California. So I don't think the Constitution is going to be much protection, not if John Roberts has his way. Biden said, take responsibility. The president says it's not his responsibility. The federal government's role is to have a national response to tackle this national pandemic. No, but wait, I thought that Trump was a dictator. He was Hitler because he was interfering with the prerequisites, the privileges of the states. But Donald Trump took no responsibility, failed, and continues to fail to do that, accusing Trump of downplaying the virus and not having a plan. Oh, yes, I'd like to see your plan. We're going to eliminate a virus. Never mind that masks don't work, particularly not the flimsy masks that people are wearing, that they're reusing, that they're sticking their hands all over, that are not fitted properly, etc., etc. Again, let's go back to the chat here and see what we've got. Thing on his left lapel? Yes, it's supposed to be there. This is a hunting jacket. Emmett Kelly's Earth says, as Joe Sobran used to say, the Constitution is no threat to the current American form of government. Actually, Arthur Schlesinger said something similar, and they were pretty much at the antipodes of political belief. Sacha Baron Cohen, yeah, he's the unfunny version of Chris Morris. Let's see, I miss Belgium, says Debreas. Let's see, 9KS is an annual festival of darkness is appropriate. Easter was canceled. Yes, Easter was canceled. And the Catholic Church from the Vatican on down, they seem to be absolutely delighted to cancel Easter. And then, I don't know, months later, when they started reopening churches, oh, so I'll just head down to the cathedral, you know, for Mass, for the Eucharist. Oh, no. Who are you? Where do you come from? Are you on the list? Have you registered? Just, oh, I guess you don't want me here. Jim Smith says, Notre Dame says they provide extra tutoring for their football players. Yeah. I suppose it's available. For, you know, but they don't have much time because they've got their football practice, which is pretty extensive, right? And there's all the time they spend, you know, driving their illegal cars given by donors. And there's all the time that they spend in the trick pads banging undergraduates, which may or may not have been, you know, provided unofficially by donors. Jules Roy said Germany used to have Walmart, and the UK there's a Walmart-owned place called Asda. I know of Asda. It's Aldi. It's low rent. It's considered a low rent. They don't have the intellectual ability, never mind the mark, says Jonathan Ferguson. No, it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. It is not the purpose of universities, particularly Christian universities, to make money by pretending that these are valid students when they are not valid students. That you know, they don't. Do they get their degrees? They certainly don't learn anything when they are there, because they are not there to learn. Let's see. Halper says, my family went to Denny's in our Sunday best after Mass. Well, you bring up an interesting point because it was longstanding Catholic doctrine that one did not eat before Mass, that one ate after Mass. This is considered to be such a stringent requirement that very few people observe it anymore. Your thoughts on sedevacantism, Emmett Kelly's Earth. I'm not a canonist, okay? I'm not an expert in these things. When I say that Bergoglio is an anti-pope, I'm not speaking from a legal position because I do not have the expertise. I use the word anti-pope in the common understanding of the word, simply that popes are supposed to believe certain things and he does not. Let's see. Jim Smith says local Catholic masses seem to have adopted public school dress codes. Well, I'm glad to see it, but I remember a controversy last year where there was a huge reaction to someone, I forget the person's name, who had written about women wearing provocative clothing at Mass. Oh, this is outrageous, etc., etc. Well, it's not outrageous at all. The whole point in addressing formally and soberly is that you do not detract attention from what is important. Der Yeoman says, I went to a funeral recently exactly as you described. Now, it used to be the case that people had a black suit that they wear for funerals. I don't think very many people have black suits anymore, but most people have the wherewithal to dress, decently at Mass or funeral, but they don't. I suppose one of the reasons being is that it's no longer expected of them. YT says, KMG, you're the best dressed person in this chat. Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know. I've always dressed, jacket and tie when I can, I suppose it's useful now because it sets me off from the mob. Emmett Kelly's Earth says false prayer, like the false humility that this Pope constantly portrays. Yes, it's just makes me grind my teeth. Jonathan Pohl says, hi, Professor Pohl, why don't you in the chat describe your Patreon? And I will read it out to our listeners. We have something from Laramie Hirsch. Just hang on a second here. Hang on. CIA Pope's false flag. Vox Day at his blog, Vox Populi, nicknamed this brief period before the presidential election as the demoralization season. It is so named because this is the time when the leftist media typically exaggerates their fake polling numbers to destroy the morale of the Republican voting base. But beyond that, this month is also well known for that particularly nasty phenomenon, the October surprise. This is from the website forgeandanvil.com. As most Catholics have now heard, Bergoglio has unleashed his opinion yet again, this time more controversially than ever, as he's given his complete approbation to the concept of gay marriage. What we're seeing here is a religio-political shell game designed to distract and confuse American Catholic voters. This announcement comes straight on the heels of a gruesome, atrocious scandal involving presidential candidate Joe Biden and his son Hunter. While Joe Biden is well known for his creepy behavior with underage girls, recent evidence shows that his son Hunter is not only a drug-addicted sexual deviant, but he may have even actively engaged in, illegal activity, I'll put it that way. Such a crime screams louder than any political talking point and almost guarantees a landslide victory for President Trump. How convenient, then, that Bergoglio should interrupt the news cycle with a mere opinion. Argentine journalists and scholars have already labeled Bergoglio as Washington's Pope, and others have called him the CIA Pope. We know from WikiLeaks leaked Podesta emails that there were big plans to have Bergoglio serve Democratic Party interests. We have archived message boards that point to Bergoglio being pre-selected for the papacy And this revelation came 1 month before the Vatican's conclave even came to their decision. Bergoglio's selection by the cardinals is deeper than even that creepy little group known as the Sankt Gallen Mafia. The CIA Pope is doing what a CIA Pope does. Key battleground states are depending heavily on the Catholic vote. What better way to discombobulate and divide Catholic voters than to add more controversial, faith-shaking opinion to the already shell-shocked Catholic voter base? Because to be sure, President Trump's presence in the geopolitical world is an impediment to many of the plans of globalist oligarchs. We'll learn in a week and a half if Bergoglio's stunt has any effect. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, says, feel free to direct message me links you'd like to share in the chat on Twitter, direct message on Twitter. Danny Figueiredo says, is it reductionist to assume everything and everyone after Vatican II is compromised? I think there are very few people who are not compromised. I don't mean a lot of prelates in the church were compromised by the sexual scandals, not because they engaged in this behavior themselves, but that they overlooked it. They didn't call it out. They didn't put a stop to it. Now, I mentioned the switch from moral judgment to a psychological judgment. Now, there are many, many cases where it was brought to the attention, say, of a bishop or archbishop, that Father so-and-so is known to be a creepy guy who is thought to be molesting boys, and that various parents have complained. And traditionally, these priests would either be sacked or, they'd be sent to a leper colony in Chad. So in many of these cases, it'd be put to the prelate that, no, let's not be cruel, and we have to understand the psychological conditions here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this bishop, he's a liberal by nature, and he decides, no, I don't want to be cruel, and everyone deserves a second chance, right? So this priest is sent to another parish, and then it all happens again, only perhaps much worse. And the bishop is compromised, because if he wants to take action against this priest, then it's put to him by sinister people that, look, you knew about this and you did nothing about it, so forget about doing anything about it now. It's too late. If you look at the number of, well, I'm reminded of the fact that John Fisher was the only bishop of the English Catholic Church who spoke out against Henry VIII. He was the only one. So I suppose this isn't new. But when you look at the bishops of the church who have spoke out against the gross heresies of Bergoglio, how many are there? Well, there's Vigano, and there's Athanasius Schneider, and there's Cardinal Burke. And are there any others? Jonathan Pohl writes, mainly now it is to sponsor my current book project, A History of Ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire and USSR. It concentrates on 1941 to 1955. The title is The Years of Great Silence. Is there an address that people can go to find out about this? We'll get back to that. Lockdown skeptics, yes. Let's see the latest madness from Britain. This is the someone who calls himself White Cockade, commenting on, well, recent events. He's not the first person to reference the St. John's Apocalypse, that maybe on November the 3rd, Gog and Magog are going to make their appearance. No one is saved alone. Pope Francis calls on men to save each other. There is just no limit. There is no limit here to this man's heresy. Dr. Peter Kwasniewski told LifeSite News, Francis has substituted a horizontal, anthropological, one might say psychological notion of salvation for the traditional meaning of salvation in Christianity. You know, the Confiteor in the Catholic Mass was changed under the new Mass that you confess your sins. In the old Mass, you confessed your sins to God. But now they make you say that you confess your sins to each other. No, that's not how it works. And I'm not going to do that. And I've never said it, you know, but most people go along with it. Let's see, from Lockdown Skeptics, Toby Young, Andy Burnham accused the Prime Minister of playing a game of poker with people's lives after he imposed a Tier 3 lockdown on Greater Manchester without agreeing a support package. Okay. Tier 3, how many tiers are there? It reminds me of, you know, the DEF CON system. And that has always confused me. DEF CON 1. Is that the worst one, or is DEF CON 4 the worst one? And I'm sure many people have a similar confusion with the various tiers. Award-winning investigative journalist David Rose wrote a sensational front-page story for the Mail yesterday documenting the scale of the collateral damage to public health caused by the lockdown and the continuing restrictions, bringing together more than 130 studies as well as testimony from readers who have contacted him via Lockdown Skeptics. The article documented the impact of this disastrous policy on every sphere of health, including cancer, heart disease, addiction, the welfare of children, domestic violence, and mental illnesses. Among the revelations are delays in treatments are said to cause a 20% rise in deaths among newly diagnosed cancer patients in England, 6,270 excess deaths this year. Treatment for strokes fell by 45% during lockdown, and there were more than 2,000 excess deaths from heart disease. More than 50,000 operations for children were canceled. Organ transplants fell by 2/3. Well, I don't believe in organ transplants. It's vivisection, so I'll pass on that, except for kidneys, because people get two. Total waiting lists for routine orthopedic and eye operations are at record levels. Calls to child abuse helplines rocketed as rates of depression and anxiety doubled. Thousands of recovering alcoholics have now relapsed. The Metropolitan Police have told pub landlords to ask for names, addresses, and photo IDs of customers before serving them to ensure people from different households aren't mixing. Pub landlords to ask for names, addresses, and photo IDs of customers before serving them. Again, England, rather, because of course Scotland does its own thing in this regard, it's pretty much reached a pre-revolutionary situation, as political scientists like to say. Professor Carl Hannigan says no sign of a second wave. This is what he told the Telegraph, that the data for the week ending October 9th, published yesterday, indicate that there are no excess deaths. And this is at the heart of it. Yes, people have COVID. People die of COVID. And deaths are attributed to COVID, but the point is, are more people dying than would have died in an ordinary year? Because people die. They die of all sorts of things. And once again, in the United States, these shocking numbers, 220,000 people dead of COVID-19, supposedly. Now, we are now near the end of October, which is the 10th month of the year. Typically in the United States, 2.8 to 3 million people die every year. The way that this 220,000 figure is waved about, one would get the impression that no one would have died except for COVID-19. Let's see. Lionel Shriver, who despite the name is actually a woman. She's a famous novelist. You might be familiar with her novel, which was made into a film, We Need to Talk About Kevin. In an interview, she says she's a fierce critic of the way the virus outbreak has been handled by governments around the world and deplores the effect of the imposed restrictions, such as social distancing, which she calls the elevation of suffering, and face masks, narcissistic, have had on everyday life. It's filmic, but it's one of those movies that never ends. It's not even that interesting. It's just awful. I hate the way wearing masks, changes my interactions with people. I find myself smiling anyway. The impulse is still there, but they don't get it. They do not receive it. It makes all commercial interchanges dry and almost hostile. I refuse to wear masks out of doors because it's epidemiologically ridiculous. I was one of the earliest lockdown skeptics from the get-go. I just thought the numbers didn't justify the response. There were not enough people dying. And what we have exposed is widespread statistical ignorance. Even in the US, people think 170,000 people dying is huge, like a massacre, but 3 million people die in the US every year, and a large proportion of those 170,000 would have died this year anyway. But of course, that sounds callous and gets you into terrible trouble, but it's true. I found the clap for carers stuff nauseating, and it won't surprise you to learn I was not out there on the curb banging my pots. Partly it's an aversion to group activities of any kind, but it's also an aversion to the idea that we should worship an institution. I find that baffling. It's said all the time that the British worship the National Health Service, that it's a religion, but why would you worship a healthcare system? This reminds me, it's been months since people in my country were out there banging their pots and pans at 7 o'clock in the evening, but I kind of missed those days for this reason. As nauseating as I found the banging, oh, we love you, frontline workers. People weren't wearing masks then, and people are not required to wear masks. So I'll take that trade-off. Too late, though. Too late. Okay, let's go back to the chat. Masks are very dehumanizing, says 9KS. Robs people of half their face. Yes, and of course, you see these people wearing glasses or wearing caps or, baseball caps, whatever. And so what are you looking at? There's no face left. There's no face left. And of course, people take a great deal of information from facial cues, and we're not getting the facial cues anymore. YT says, same. I pull down the mask instinctively when I talk to a cashier. I'm tired of not seeing people's faces. Pete Ferguson says, you ever tried doing judo while wearing one of those stupid masks? God help us. Tricky Woo says, I refuse to suffocate myself. And again, I was pleased to see my own fears validated in recent studies about masks and the various pernicious conditions attached to them. Whenever I'm forced to wear a mask, which is really only in Walmart because it's required on public transportation. So I have not used public transportation in the 4 or 5 weeks that it's been required. Because if I were to say, take the SkyTrain downtown Vancouver, it's about 40 minutes. And so I'm supposed to be sitting in a subway car for 40 minutes wearing a mask. And I think that I would end up whimpering or screaming. But no, I found out that it was true. I had this fear that I was getting dizzy because I'm ingesting carbon dioxide, which you will remember is supposed to be breathed out, out with the bad, in with the good, right? And it turns out that this is actually what's happening. What are people putting masks on their pets? Really? Really? But I suppose, yes, in the same way that years now people have been dressing up dogs with little sweaters and the like. I never understood that. They have fur. Pete Ferguson says at some point trad cats are going to have to stop deluding themselves that as long as the anti-pope doesn't speak from the throne, the church can come out of this intact. Yeah. Just there is a big difference between, so-called trad Catholics and conservative Catholics. The conservative Catholics threw in the towel, about 20 years ago. They started saying these ridiculous things like, oh, the priestly sexual scandals were just as bad before Vatican II. than they since became. Absolute rubbish. It is well known to anyone, not just people who had been to seminaries, but anyone who knows anything about seminaries, that people who were entirely innocent of homosexual behavior or even homosexual longings were routinely chucked from seminaries until the middle 1960s because there was a fear of what they used to call inappropriate attachments. Okay, let's see what Alex Berenson has to say. Sometimes he cheers me up. Oh, this is from Benjamin Applebaum. This is amusing. Here's a Venn diagram of people who think distance learning is working for young people, A, and the people who have young children. And of course, they don't cross each other's boundaries at all. Berenson comments, fact check, open schools, fire teachers who sick out. A Danish newspaper reports the mask study has been censored. The headline reads, does a mask work? Top journals refuse to print the Danish answer. Why? You would think, how many people are loving wearing masks? You know, there's a certain number of people who are masochists, right? Is this a form of masochism? It is a form of masochism that is somehow made genuine, made noble by the fact that it's supposedly stopping everyone dying. Is that what it is? Because you would think that people who are forced to wear masks would, oh, really? We don't have to wear masks anymore? Yeah, that's great. Because, you know, I didn't know how I could go on with wearing masks all the time. But now, no more masks. No, we got to wear masks forever. Why? Because certain people feel good about it, because it makes them feel superior. Huge UK study, being on a ventilator is bad for you. Luckily, of the 84,000 people in the study, only 60 were on ventilators. Yes, cognitive deficits in recovered COVID patients are significant, even for mild cases, and increase with disease severity. Cognitive tests, yeah. See, what they're saying now is that, oh, COVID-19, it's a mystery disease. Ooh, and there's all of these symptoms, that every symptom under the sun, really. Twitter hive mind, quick question. There was a graph very recently showing the median age of death from or with COVID by country. I think the US was at 75.8. The European countries were higher. Can anyone point to it? I believe in my country, the average age is 82. 82. Someone named Stephen had tweeted, is it completely nuts to wonder if Democratic Party operatives might have had knowledge or influence over the origins of COVID-19? They have certainly benefited. The timing is suspicious. Berenson responds, yes, it's completely nuts. Never confuse conspiracy with financial/career or even altruistic motivations that lead to an incompetence cover-up. Of course, the problem is when the government lies to you continuously about pretty much everything, and many things which have been denounced as conspiracy theories turn out to be absolutely true, then why would you expect anyone to believe anything that the government said? That's a serious question, by the way. Let's see. My old friend Michael Brennan Doherty writes in National Review, Hunter Biden's emails show us what we already know. It's debunked. It's disinformation. Insofar as it's true, it just shows Joe Biden is a great dad. You should be prevented from sharing it on social media. Maybe you should be punished for trying to share it because it's debunked. A Washington Post story quoting other people who were in on this thing that didn't happen says it's fake news. You're doing Putin's work for him. We're going to have truth and reconciliation commissions after this election to deal with this kind of thing. Listen, maybe it looks bad, but it's not illegal. That's how the media has responded to the Hunter Biden disclosures at the New York Post. They can probably keep it up through Election Day and even inauguration. Though, as I write, Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani seem to be preparing the conservative mediaplex to feast on revelations of some kind of East Asian bathhouse bacchanal with a heaping side of financial subordination to the Chi-Coms. Yeah, I joked on Twitter, and again, this is the year when Your jokes have a terrible habit of becoming true in this nightmare world in which we reside. That the Democrats are going to move their final slogan for the presidential campaign is going to be the same as Eddie Edwards of Louisiana: vote for the crook. It's important. But we didn't need the post-revelations or sordid photos of Hunter Biden to know the story had the potential to derail the Joe Biden campaign. You know who else knew it was a problem? The Joe Biden campaign, which tried to handle the story last year by releasing details to the New Yorker in a piece titled, "Will Hunter Biden Jeopardize His Father's Campaign?" Who else knew it was a problem? The State Department in 2015. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent explained that because Ukraine was under Joe Biden's portfolio in the Obama administration, it looks terrible that his son Hunter Biden was taking a board seat on a Ukrainian government-connected energy company that had serious ethical and legal problems, especially with Joe Biden bragging about his own interventions in the legal landscape of the country. Biden's office reportedly told Kent that Vice President Biden didn't have the bandwidth to deal with Hunter. The New Yorker attempt at extinguishing the Hunter Biden story told us that Hunter himself saw himself as a provider for the Biden family. This is pretty astounding. Hunter Biden's first job was at MBNA, the credit card conglomerate that was a huge Joe Biden bundler. Joe Biden would do the industry's bidding in the Senate, and an MBNA executive helped arrange the senior Biden acquire his multi-million-dollar spread in Delaware. Again, I'll remind you that Joe Biden, who has spent his entire life in what is amusingly called public service, lives in a house in Delaware that is worth $16 million. How does that happen? Hunter Biden would move into the Clinton administration and back to MBNA as a consultant, which is often enough a code word for guy who knows powerful people, cash for access. He would go on to work for Eudora Global, an investment firm founded by another big cash bundler for Joe Biden, and even for a hedge fund founded by his uncle, Joe Biden's brother. Later, he had a high-pay, little-work job at Amtrak, which Biden was providing for the other. That Joe Biden movingly says loving things to his poor demon-haunted son is beyond doubt. The question is whether Joe Biden ever had the decency and, yes, the love to say, "Stop trading on my name," or was he out of the bandwidth? And the world we live in now, the way we live now, your brother was told to retrain in computers when a trade deal she favored destroyed his industry. She got to be on Walmart's corporate board. She gets $1 million to speak to Goldman Sachs, that would be Hillary Clinton, because they expected her to be president. Your town got an opioid epidemic. She got everything handed to her. Everything you work for can be taken away in an instant. And she had the nerve to call you deplorable. That was part of the voter psychology that drove Donald Trump to the White House in 2016. And it could have been part of the 2020 story. We don't need the emails. It's all there in the public record. Joe Biden has denied that this story is true or any of this story is true. He said they are a last-ditch effort in this desperate campaign to smear me and my family. And he is referring to the report of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. He just said it's none whatsoever. That's what he said. This is the same garbage, Rudy Giuliani, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no attempt to look at the details of this, point by point by point. No, none of it is true. I mentioned Sacha Baron Cohen, who is the unfunny version of Chris Morris. According to The Guardian, the reputation of Rudy Giuliani could be set for a further blow. What do you mean further blow? You see the planted axiom here? Is that Rudy Giuliani bringing to light Hunter Biden's laptop was a blow to his reputation. The release of highly embarrassing footage in Sacha Baron Cohen's follow-up to Borat. In the film released Friday, the former New York mayor and current personal attorney to Trump is seen reaching into his trousers and apparently touching his genitals, reclining on a bed in the presence of the actor playing Borat's daughter, who is posing as a TV journalist. I believe that Giuliani has denied this. I don't know why anyone would. Chris Morris did a TV show back in the late 90s, and there was a follow-up in 2000, where he got a whole bunch of famous people to go along with obviously ridiculous things. Obviously ridiculous things. And I suppose, if you're famous for anything, if you're a celebrity of any kind, and anyone wants you to take part in any of these things, you just say no. You just say no. Because what do you know about this anyway? What do you know about these things anyway? My favorite was a conservative MP who ended up making this warning about a drug called cake, where what was it that, like 5 seconds would seem to last for 10 hours. And he came up with these obviously ridiculous slang nicknames, or that people in Japan were ingesting drugs, through their lungs by passing them through dogs. And Claire Rayner, British agony aunt, she saw a made-up film about this, and she thought it was real. This is from The Post. Rudy Giuliani says the alleged Borat sting, where he was supposedly caught in a compromising position with a woman in a hotel room, is a complete fabrication. I was tucking in my shirt. Throughout the scene, Giuliani, 76, and Maria Bakalova, who plays Borat's daughter, both touch hands, and at one point the actress puts her hand on his knee. When the fake interview is finished, she says, "Shall we have a drink in the bedroom?" He says, tucking in my shirt, at no time before, during, and after this interview was I ever inappropriate. If Sacha Baron Cohen implies otherwise, he is a stone-cold liar. In fact, as the New York Post today reports, it looks to me like an exaggeration through editing. As soon as I realized it was a setup, I called the police. This is an effort to blunt my relentless exposure of the criminality and depravity of Joe Biden and his entire family. Deadline Hollywood reports CAA had a distribution screening in September where there was no mention of the scene holding any importance. We are preparing much bigger dumps off the hard drive from hell, of which Joe Biden will be unable to defend or hide from. I have the receipts. Oh, Linda Ronstadt. Remember Linda Ronstadt? She's one of the very biggest music stars of the 1980s. Well, she's still alive, and some years ago, she discovered that she was Mexican. And, of course, she has a German surname. But no, it's all been Mexican for a couple of decades now. Just how Mexican is she? According to Wikipedia, Linda Maria Ronstadt was born in Tucson, Arizona on July 15, 1946, the third of 4 children of Gilbert Ronstadt, a prosperous machinery merchant who ran the F. Ronstadt Company, and Ruth Mary Copeman. Copeman. That is not a Mexican name. That is not a Mexican name. Linda's father came from a pioneering Arizona ranching family and was of German, English, and Mexican ancestry. Yeah, okay. Linda Ronstadt's great-great-grandfather, graduate engineer Friedrich August Ronstadt, who went by Federico Augusto Ronstadt, immigrated to the Southwest, then a part of Mexico in the 1840s from Hanover, Germany, and married a Mexican citizen, eventually settling in Tucson. So Linda Ronstadt is about as Mexican as I am Quebecois. I am 1/8 Quebecois by blood. You don't hear me carrying on about it because it's completely insignificant to my life, but not to Linda Ronstadt's. According to David Eng at Breitbart, Linda Ronstadt has called President Donald Trump the new Hitler and said that Mexicans are the new Jews. Yeah, okay. I used to read the music press extensively, really extensively, to the extent that I read a lot of stories about people whose records I didn't listen to or didn't buy. Let's put it that way. Linda Ronstadt, I heard some of her songs on the radio. I thought some of them were good. You know, she made a record, in the early 80s, new wave songs. I thought that one was pretty good. But I remember reading an interview with her, and this would have been in the late 70s, where she was talking about a guitarist named Lowell George. And Lowell George, he was what they call a session cat, but he had a band called Little Feat. And Lowell George, according to Linda Ronstadt, was a hilarious fellow. And Linda Ronstadt thought that it was hilarious that Lowell George said that he was going to call his solo album, which came out, I believe, in 1980, he was going to call it N-Word Rich. Now, if you're an older listener, you will remember that this was once a popular phrase used to describe, let's say, Black people who got a hold of some money and pissed it away in a very quick fashion. But I really don't think that Linda Ronstadt would like to be reminded that she thought that this deeply repugnant phrase was amusing. I think that we should start reminding her of this, and we should make her give several groveling apologies for this. Tom Piatek, who I knew when he was at Chronicles. He's associated with what appears to be a new website called American Remnant. He has a piece today. David Frum recently retweeted someone quoting him as saying, "It's like 7 days in May, except this time the generals are the good guys." Now, that really took me aback. This is Charles Baker had said, as David Frum said some time ago, in a different Trump crisis, it's like 7 days in May, except the generals are the good guys. And he was responding to a tweet from, or a piece from Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy. I will really have to track this down because what is David Frum been following my Twitter? He couldn't possibly listen to this show because I've been joking. How long have I been joking about this? When did the first rumors of the military coup happen? Was that in 2017, 3 years ago? I've been joking for 3 years that the deep state intends to remake 7 Days in May. Only this time, the generals are the good guys. And let's say I was quite taken aback by that. Piatek continues, 7 Days in May, of course, concerns a military coup against the President of the United States. Earlier, Frum rejected the argument advanced by Ted Cruz that Amy Coney Barrett should be confirmed so that the Supreme Court would have a full complement of 9 justices to resolve any disputes arising from the presidential election. Frum's reason for rejecting Cruz's argument: in order to resolve any disputes, the Supreme Court would need legitimacy. And a court which had Amy Coney Barrett as an associate justice would lack the requisite legitimacy. Of course, in the American political system, legitimacy is conferred by the Constitution. And the Constitution provides that the president shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors and other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. If the Senate votes to confirm, she will be a fully legitimate member of the Supreme Court. David Frum is so consumed with hatred for the President of the United States that he is fantasizing about military coups and rejecting the authority of the Constitution. It's past time for David Frum to pack his bags and go home. Frum can hardly complain. He retained his Canadian citizenship after he somehow became a naturalized citizen of the United States. Let the Canadians have him. Our Kurt Wood, who has written for Chronicles, commented, "Oddly, I thought the generals were the good guys in 7 days. They were trying to save the country from a weak president who was about to sign a ridiculous arms control agreement with the Soviet Union. The generals were trying to save the country from the president. In Trump, we have a president trying to save the country from the generals and their deep state military-industrial complex regime." As I recall, another general who actually became president said something about that. Oh, do I really want to go into these stories about, oh, the poor black journalists? Trump is being mean, deliberately mean to black female journalists. Again, this is an organized campaign. Oh, this woman, Kristen Welker of NBC. Everyone loves Kristen Welker, apparently. She is just outstanding reporter. No one has ever raised any concerns about the partiality of her reporting. Well, no one at Vanity Fair or Talking Points Memo would. Now, would they? Charlemagne the God notes that Donald Trump is going after black votes, and he thinks that Trump is going to be somewhat successful in this, in that the Democratic Party has just assumed their votes for the longest time. This piece came out in May, but I don't read National Review. I haven't read it for years, but it's by David Mamet, who is one of my favorite writers. And he has a piece about Donald Trump. Mamet has made it known that he thinks Trump is done a fine job as president, and that certainly he will be voting for him, his re-election. But he's talking about Trump derangement syndrome. And it concludes, "The message on Nebuchadnezzar's wall was, 'You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting.' Trump mania is not a message, but a key serving to obscure an underlying message. The key, the accusations of the left, disguises an underlying terror, operating here just as the near psychotic, immobilized by a terrifying free-floating anxiety, extemporizes specific phobias in an effort to gain some control. It's not that I'm losing my mind in an unnameable panic," he thinks, "but that Martians or mice, food additives or Jews are trying to destroy me." The left's loathing of Trump differs from their other attempts at constructive phobia in this. He is not an event, a phenomenon, an attitude, or a group, but an actual human being. He has supplanted previous attempted solutions to panic, but universal and vicious loathing comes close in its virulence to revealing the key, and thus the presence of an underlying code. He is a mere human being who has the temerity to disregard the taboo. In the Salem witch trials of 1692, some brave soul might speak up for one accused of witchcraft, but no one would have dared to say, and few to think, there is no such thing as witchcraft. The left's hatred of Trump reveals their code. They are here like the ghoul Rumpelstiltskin, whose power disappeared when the victim said his name. Trump is loathed because he is feared, and he is feared because he named the monster. The monster is the zeitgeist, that is to say, the left. It's clear that Mamet has a fascination with the fable Rumpelstiltskin. This comes up in his movie Heist, where there's a very good joke where Gene Hackman is about to be shot to death by Danny DeVito, and he has been trading under the name, Bergman? And Danny DeVito says, famous, last words, last requests. He says to Gene Hackman, "Don't you want to know my," he said, "what's your real name?" And he says, Danny DeVito says, "Rumpelstiltskin." And Gene Hackman says, "What was it before he changed it?" That's a very good Jewish joke. Oh, so it turns out that elderly members that are listening or watching might remember that Gerald Ford really stuck his foot in it in 1976 when he's running for president against Jimmy Carter, where in a debate, he asserted that Poland was not dominated by the Soviet Union. We have a similar situation here This is a story from a Newsweek, or its opinion piece, at a town, and it is by Gladden Pappin, assistant professor of politics, University of Dallas. At a town hall event in Philadelphia last week, former VP Joe Biden was asked what he thought of America's foreign policy under the Trump administration. Quote, "You see what's happened in everything from Belarus to Poland to Hungary, and the rise of totalitarian regimes in the world. And as well, this president embraces all the thugs in the world," unquote. With that half-insulting, half-clueless remark, counting Poland and Hungary among the totalitarian regimes of the world, Biden set off a small diplomatic firestorm. Or he would have, if these were normal times and if insults to Poles and Hungarians were deemed worthy of major media outlet reporting. Protestations from Poles and the Hungarian foreign minister aside, however, no firestorm broke out in English-speaking media, and for one very simple reason. To the media class, the categorization of Poland and Hungary as totalitarian regimes was not a gaffe at all. It did not lead to fact-checking or hasty denials. Notably, no EU diplomats defended their member states either. Rather, it points to new levels of laziness in American foreign policy thinking, where vague impressions of totalitarian, read nationalist, culturally traditional rule, are enough to cast aside countries that have been allied with the United States for generations. For these viceroys of global liberalism, the new hostility is fully intentional. And apparently, Poland and Hungary have a very high opinion of the United States. 79% Poles, according to Pew, and 66% of Hungarians. And of course, there's NATO involved there, but apparently that's not good enough. Now, there's an ethnic animus involved here, but I won't get into that. J5 Killer, check in there. Obama is really packing them in Philly. 140 cars, 200 people, and 350 cats. Rich Zioli had tweeted, "So Obama comes to Philly to campaign for Biden, and Biden stays home, less than 30 miles away in Wilmington." Anyone else think that's strange? And here's a picture of the car rally for Biden in Philadelphia, which is one of America's largest cities, and there are 140 cars. Joe Biden is sick, tweeted, around 5,000 people are watching former President Barack Obama on YouTube, even though it is heavily promoted by the controversial platform. Stream ended minutes later with 20,061 total views. Democrats claim to be double-digit points ahead. No convincing evidence of that. From Haunted Hank Slow, sure, Joe Biden might have been using Hunter as his bagman for massive bribes, enabling his crack addiction and possibly sexual impropriety with his own granddaughter. But did you see Rudy Giuliani accepted a 25-year-old actress's unprompted invitation to her hotel room? Andy Ngo had tweeted, "Police stand guard as Charlie Hebdo cartoons of Muhammad were projected onto a town hall in Montpellier, France, as a tribute to the history teacher who was beheaded by a Muslim refugee. In 2015, 12 people at Charlie Hebdo magazine were killed by jihadists." And J5 Killer says, "This is the start of how you do it. The end involves the spirit of Charles Martel." Indeed. I don't know, Macron, he's a very weak person, but as the worm turned in France, pray Saint-Denis that this is so. Yeah, let's talk about Bizarro World here. This is from Stars and Stripes. Major General Stephen Neary has been relieved of commands of U.S. Marines in Europe and Africa while the service investigates allegations he used a racial slur that denigrates Black people, the Corps said Tuesday. Care to name this racial slur? Have we got to the point where it is too controversial to use the expression the N-word now? Marine Commandant General David Berger relieved Neary on Monday due to a loss of trust and confidence in his ability to serve in combat, the Corps said in a statement. The Corps previously said that the investigation was connected to the use of a racial slur but declined to go into detail. And here's a picture of members of the Marine Corps wearing masks outdoors. Stars and Stripes reported earlier this month that the two-star general's actions were being probed for using the word during a training event at a Stuttgart area headquarters. Now, this is where it gets truly bizarro world. The incident occurred in August on the parade field outside Marine Corps Forces Europe and Africa headquarters in Böblingen, Germany. A Lance Corporal who was present told Stars and Stripes that Neary used the N-word while Marines were doing physical training outdoors with loud music playing. Some of the rap music incorporated the word, which prompted Neary to ask the junior Marines how they would feel if he said it, the Lance Corporal said. The Marine, who spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of retribution, yeah, he's really up to the August standards of the Marine Corps, isn't this Lance Corporal, a little sneak? Said Black, white, and Latino Marines were jolted when the general said the word. Even if Neary was attempting to be instructed about the taboo nature of the word, it came as a shock to hear it from a white general officer, the Lance Corporal said. He lost respect right there. Why are Marines exercising to rap music? This is a question that is not addressed in this story from Stars and Stripes. Don't you think that's interesting? Like, when did this start? Who authorized this? But of course, reporters don't, and the reporter here is John Van Diver, they don't ask those kinds of questions anymore. And I'm waiting for the first person to say what I'm saying. The first person, any kind of position of authority or influence to say that, oh, we're not allowed to say this word anymore. We're not even allowed to quote the word when someone else has said it. We're denouncing that person for saying that word. That's how powerful this word is. This word apparently has one of two effects. The first effect is that it reduces Black people in the vicinity, those who can hear it, to a state of gibbering hysteria, or alternately to a state of murderous and justified rage. How is it that this word, which is the modern tetragrammaton, which can't be uttered, is heard by Black people, typically dozens or hundreds of times a day, and even by many of them said dozens or hundreds of times a day? I'm just waiting for the first person to bring up this anomaly. Oh, there's a troubling story from San Francisco. This is from Zero Hedge, and I suppose these two stories are linked because the Marine Corps are a bunch of sissies now, apparently, and I include that in, collapse of civilization stuff. The effects of allowing chaos to prevail in liberal-run cities across America might not be obvious to liberals now, but when their cities empty out completely, it's going to become crystal clear. Such is the case in San Francisco, where the city's new normal of shoplifting and chaos has driven another Walgreens pharmacy out of the city. The move to close the Walgreens at Van Ness and Eddy came after months of seeing its shelves repeatedly cleaned out by brazen shoplifters, according to the San Francisco Chronicle. The location served many older people who lived in the area. One customer told the paper, "All of us knew it was coming. Whenever we go in there, they always have problems with shoplifters." The same customer photographed someone in the store days prior clearing a couple shelves and placing the goods into a backpack, because when there's no police and politicians are afraid to enforce the law, why not? The penalty for shoplifting is a nonviolent misdemeanor that carries a maximum sentence of 6 months, but in most cases for simple shoplifting, the criminal is simply released with conditions. Apparently, the clerks say that it's Walgreens' policy not to get involved. They don't want anyone getting injured or getting sued, so the guys just keep coming in and taking whatever they want. When the Chronicle went to visit the store, they noticed aisle after aisle of near empty shelves and said that beauty products seemed to be a favorite target, While the Chronicle was in the store, a man with a mask on walked in, emptied 2 shelves into a bag, and walked out the door. When they asked a clerk where all the products were, the clerk responded, "Go ask the people in the alleys. They have it all." Walgreen Corporate commented, "Organized retail crime has increased the challenge for all retail, and Walgreens is not immune to that." This location is the 3rd Walgreens to close in the city over the past year. This is, how does the meme go? This is not a nightmare. This is the world that you chose, and this is the world that San Franciscans have chosen for themselves. I've never paid much attention to Chris Pratt. He was a shabby, chubby guy in Parks and Recreation where he played an idiot. Then he lost a bunch of weight and got bulked up. And now he's a spandex hero. As I reported last week, there was a Avengers. You know what this is? Part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's been approximately 79 Avengers movies made or spin-offs. There was an Avengers Biden fundraiser last week, and Chris Pratt decided that he was not going to take part in it, so he must be canceled. This is from, Vulture.com. Chris Pratt's co-stars have apparently mobilized in the wake of a Twitter meme which declared Pratt to be the worst of the Hollywood Chris's. It began with a tweet asking people to pick the worst Chris from a group that included Chris's, Pine, Evans, Hemsworth, and Pratt. The overwhelming consensus on Twitter seemed to be that Pratt, whose politics have caused controversy in recent years, is the worst. Robert Downey Jr. came to Pratt's defense on Instagram. So did Mark Ruffalo. But then the story. What about Brie Larson? Brie Larson won an Oscar, 4 or 5 years ago? Then she was in this stupid movie, Captain America, which grossed, $1.2 billion? She fronted a movie? I don't know. I can tell you, just for myself, and I don't think this is unusual, if over the period of, 4 or 5 years, I'd won an Oscar for acting, and I'd fronted a movie which grossed $1.2 billion, I'd be pretty pleased with myself. But apparently, Brie Larson has been harassed for 3 years. And who was standing up for Brie Larson? Everyone was standing up for Brie Larson because these evil meanies, the gamers, the incels, they were trying to destroy Captain America, just like they destroyed the last Star Wars trilogy. And just like they destroyed Cat Lady's Ghostbusters. But oh no, won't someone please think of Brie Larson? Oh, Pratt's association with the evangelical Hillsong Church, whose founder has made anti-alphabet people statements, plus the fact that Pratt follows several conservative commentators, politicians, and organizations on social media, and has remained silent on his views leading up to the presidential election, has led many to assume he is a supporter of President Trump. This is from the Washington Post. Now, from Emily Yar, now I can be accused of being trivial on this show, but when the whole world becomes trivial, one is left with a little choice but to become trivial oneself. I hope I do in some way elevate the triviality. Who else was dragged into this? A bunch of people who were not supposedly stood up for. Oh, Zendaya. Yes, and Tessa Thompson. They faced sexist and racist comments for the roles in the franchise, yet there has not been a similar effort by castmates to jump to their defense. Oh, yeah. Remember that story of that chubby Vietnamese actress who was supposedly bullied off social media? Rose Tico? There's no evidence. There's no evidence to this whatsoever. But here we get to the heart of it. Actress Ellen Page, who's famously a lesbian, I think she's more famous for that than anything else now, responded to a tweet about Pratt's appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, in which he discussed his spirituality. Okay, but his church is infamously anti-alphabet people, so maybe address that too. Yeah, he speaks about Christianity in public, so he must be canceled. Of course, when you get Robert Downey Jr. and Mark Ruffalo, and there were others to stand up for you, it shows you've got some powerful friends. I think I'm going to end up with this, and this is a story from Canada, but it's a story about this nightmarish world that we live in. The CBC, of course, is paid for by the taxpayers of Canada. It is supposed to be an independent news organization, but increasingly it appears to be quite simply an organ of the deep state. It's an astonishing story published by someone called Thomas Daigle. It's a very long story. It's called Canadian Professor's Website Helps Russia Spread Disinformation, says U.S. State Department. Ahead of U.S. elections, State Department identified site as major Kremlin-aligned proxy. Oh dear. As U.S. authorities guard against dirty tricks from foreign adversaries in the run-up to the November 3rd presidential election, an unlikely source has come under new scrutiny as a major conduit of Russian-linked disinformation, a Montreal-based website run by a retired University of Ottawa professor. It's not an unlikely source because people have been after this retired University of Ottawa professor for at least 3 years, making the same bogus claims. Talk about disinformation. The platform, Global Research, features a Canadian domain name, and offers an ever-expanding collection of conspiracy theories, such as the myth that the 9/11 attacks and COVID-19 pandemic were both planned in order to control the population. The website also hosts articles experts have attributed to a Russian spy agency. With more than 275,000 Facebook followers and a potential readership in excess of 350,000 per article, the site has the biggest reach among so-called Kremlin-aligned disinformation sites, according to the U.S. State Department. This is part of a larger effort to sow disarray and distrust within Western democracy, says James Andrew Lewis, a senior researcher at the Washington, D.C.-based think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies. U.S. intelligence agencies found Russian state actors mounted a multifaceted assault before the 2016 U.S. election in an effort to undermine the candidacy of Hillary Clinton and bolster Donald Trump's odds of winning. They say the operation involved spreading false claims and amplifying divisive debates within American society online. Russia was so successful in 2016, I'm sure they'll try the same thing again in 2020, Lewis said, and this website is part of that effort. Michael Chosudovsky, the University of Ottawa professor emeritus of economics who runs the site, told CBC News through a lawyer that his platform is not a Russian-aligned disinformation site and urged a reporter not to embark on a witch hunt. In an email, the lawyer also said his client would not agree to an interview. I know a little bit about Michel Chosudovsky. He is an old Jewish lefty, an old-style lefty. But no, he must be working for Russia. And why must he be working for Russia? Because he's an anti-globalist. This is the whole point of this story. There are 12 separate people or institutions which are quoted by the sham reporter Thomas Daigle to vilify Chosudovsky. There is not a single person quoted in his defense. Would it not have been possible to contact some of the people that write for his site to get them to say some positive things about him? Let's see, yes. Along with 40 research associates and writers, the website lists a post office box within a convenience store. Ooh, how sinister, as its mailing address. Chosudovsky, a frequent guest on the Russian state TV network RT, again, oh, yeah, that's really wicked. So he must be working for Russia. Yeah, well, I can make the same claim about any of the experts that appear on CNN or MSNBC, that they're working for the CIA. He is the site's editor and one of its main contributors. He's recently questioned the seriousness of COVID-19, recently labeling it a manufactured, and I'm not going to repeat the next word because I don't want to be bumped off this. Disinformation researchers have previously singled out Russia and China as drivers of coronavirus conspiracy theories. One of global, okay, so they deleted something. Marcus Kolga, founder of the website DisinfoWatch, says that platforms like Global Research give outlandish narratives an air of legitimacy that they wouldn't otherwise have, what's known as information laundering. The North American media became Stalinist so gradually that nobody noticed. On Tuesday, for example, Global Research posted a piece underscoring Joe Biden's unproven cognitive decline. Oh, unproven. You just have to look at him and listen to him. The same article also warned of the imminent danger of a Kamala Harris presidency, suggesting that as prosecutor, she disproportionately jailed black men because of a vendetta against her Jamaican American father. That's a claim. It's opinion. Okay. Kamala Harris, tough on crime, even while she was smoking weed and listening to Tupac Shakur music that had not come out because he wasn't recording at the time. It is well known and not disputed that she has had nothing to do with her Jamaican father for quite a few years, and that her Jamaican father does not approve of her. The website has also published articles sympathetic to the Russian-backed regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Oh, yeah. This is a regime that protects Christians, so it must be bad. Keep in mind, in any dispute between Muslims and Christians, the deep state will always favor Muslims. 100%. Oh, and other pieces critical of NATO, the Western alliance that has sought to contain Moscow's aggression. Moscow's aggression. That's a good one. Gorbachev was promised that NATO would not be moved up to Russia's borders. And of course, this promise was violated many, many times. Given that that's the reason the Cold War ended, because of this promise that the nukes were moved out. But now let's just ignore that part. This year, a U.S. State Department report identified Global Research as being part of a network of proxy sites that, while having no visible ties to Moscow, served no other purpose but to push pro-Kremlin content. Again, the CBC is telling us that anyone who is anti-globalist is a puppet of Putin. And they just keep quoting all these authorities, just one authority after another. And they managed to find two University of Ottawa professors who, it seems, have been bullied into publicly denouncing him. His website also features photos of him in discussion with the late Cuban communist leader Fidel Castro. You mean like Pierre Trudeau? Whose wife famously serenaded him in Havana? Let's see. Oh, B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith doesn't like what he has to say. What else? Just everything, the whole kitchen sink is in here. Oh, sock puppets. Oh, the GRU. And crazy claims, such as that the 9/11 attacks were used as an excuse to invade the Middle East. Well, of course, that is true. Of course, it's true. Crazy claims that the West has been supporting Al-Qaeda. That's not a crazy claim, because the so-called moderates in Serbia, boo, not Serbia, Syria, it's getting late in the day. They were Al-Qaeda. They just changed their name. Those are the moderates that the government of the United States, before Trump, supported, the government of Britain, the Canadian government. I hold a no brief for Michel Chossudovsky. I've seen some of his articles. Some of the stuff on his website, I would agree with. Some of it, I wouldn't be. But the CBC apparently has decided that this man must be destroyed because he does not follow the narrative. The narrative is that the globalism is good for you. Invade the world. Invite the world. Oh, let's have troops in Afghanistan forever. There's been a campaign to defund the CBC for a number of years now. And if you'd asked me, I don't know, even as recently as 5 years ago, what I thought about this, I would have thought, no, I've got my disagreements with the CBC, but I think they perform a valuable service. I wouldn't say that. No, I simply wouldn't say it at all. CBC in its political coverage essentially rewrites Liberal Party press releases. And Rosemary Barton, who maybe she's still on Twitter, her picture, her background picture is her and yummy, dreamy Justin Trudeau. Because let's see if she's changed that. See if she's changed it. Oh, she's changed it now. Because she, oh my God, I'm so close. I'm so close to yummy, dreamy Justin. And yeah, of course, perfectly objective. So, final look at the chat here. No, Claire Caw, it is not blasphemy to call Mary the Mother of God. I don't, if people are going to take issue with Catholic theology, I think it's necessary for them to actually know something about it. What are the final comments here? Polls polled by Professor Paul, Jogokin 666. I don't want to go into specific conspiracy theories. I do not think that Israel was behind 9/11. If you're familiar with the famous Fox News reporting on the, what were they? The art students traveling the United States, which got yanked from Fox News. It was a 3 or 4 part story. I think it's entirely likely that the government of Israel knew of the existence of the bombers. And I don't know, they decided not to share this information with the government of the United States. I think that's possible. No, but I don't think that 9/11 was fake, and I don't think that the Israelis blew it up. The Israeli government is obviously, or Israeli intelligence services are obviously tracking people in the West. They're tracking a lot of people in the West. And they learn a lot of things. Heck McNeck says, remember when all Jewish leftists were anti-globalists? Yes, I do. They used to use, even people like Harold Wilson, they've used this phrase, the gnomes of Zurich, the money men who control everything. No, but the people need to control things, not the money men. That was before the money men were woke. Donald Robertson says Stephen Colbert has gone some creepy Orwellian. He seems like a creepy man. He seems very, very unpleasant. Oh, Captain Marvel, not Captain America. I'm sorry about that. I'm not interested in cape shit spandex movies. I'm not. I saw on Smack Talk, Professor Tosspot's review of this, and the movie just looks just terrible. And the CGI is, these movies are all CGI. And, people used to get excited when a gas station would blow up. But now we have to blow up whole cities, or whole countries, or whole continents, or whole planets, or whole solar systems. No, Brie Larson, again, she's a very good-looking woman. But she seems to be a very bitter, nasty woman. And it certainly comes across in this Captain Marvel movie, or in, I don't know, anything that she's done since Community. You may have seen that interview that she did, about a year ago? When she was with one of those Chris's, Hemsworth, and they were discussing stunts and he said something like, maybe, one day you'll be compared to Tom Cruise. And she said, no, well, maybe, I'll be compared to myself. Thank you very much. And I thought, what are you getting so upset about? Tom Cruise is a legend in the movie industry, regardless of what you think of him. He's been around for a long, long time. And he has made many good movies, and he has made many, 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 many movies which have made lots of money. One would think that in terms of stunts, being compared to Tom Cruise would be considered a compliment, but not to Brie Larson. Chogokin 666, they don't do cadence calls with slurs anymore. I don't know. I was thinking about this. I don't know, but I've been told. Now follow that up with something that isn't offensive. Glib Medley says Marines need a safe space. Someone suggested that, Halsey suggested that this Lance Corporal needs what they call a blanket party. Metal Mike says, I'm rewatching the Bill and Ted movies now because of KMG. Yeah, then my final comment. The movie, the second one, The Bogus Journey, it ends with a song by a 1970s English band called Argent. God Gave Rock and Roll to You. And I quite like that song. And but I was not pleased that in the movie, they do the Kiss. Yeah, they do the Kiss version of it. The song is by Russ Ballard, who was the lead guitarist, and he's written a bunch of hits, Liar and New York Groove. There's another Kiss connection there, Ace Frehley. But what Kiss did was they took this song and they added some superfluous lyrics and ended up, carrying off a large part of the publishing for it. The song was, I hate Kiss. I just hate Kiss with a passion. I just can't tell you how much I hate Kiss. And on that bombshell, that is the end of today's show. Mark your calendars, or whatever is your digital equivalent. As mentioned previously, the show will begin an hour early tomorrow because of the second presidential debate, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've not done so already. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I will be discussing Werner Herzog's beautiful Nosferatu from 1979. On the book club, I will be discussing a memoir of the Spanish Civil War written from the nationalist side, the good side, very well written by Peter Kemp. It's called Mine Were of Trouble. If you'd like to support this live stream, very much appreciated, especially this time of flux and mutability. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me money directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I shall leave you with this. In these times of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.